The best way to describe Persona 5 Tactica is that it's solid but safe. This is a modern tactical RPG but with a Persona spin. It features charming visuals, strong voice acting, mature themes, and the battle mechanics that the series is known for. There are a few changes though, such as every member of the Phantom Thieves being able to use a secondary persona, and individual leveling has been replaced with an overall team level. These two changes are actually pretty big, because it completely removes team composition from the equation. As long as you continue to create new personas, you'll find yourself competitive in every mission. In fact, you might not find yourself struggling at all on lower difficulties. Another big change is that you no longer have to worry about elemental weaknesses, you just need to ensure that you're in cover, otherwise the enemy has an increased chance of landing a critical hit. The same concept applies for the player. Most abilities will either force enemies out of cover or make them vulnerable to a follow-up attack. Once you press the advantage, I recommend being as aggressive as possible because the game rewards you for speed. Overall, I think this is one of the easier tactical RPGs on the market, so if you're a veteran of the genre, I really recommend increasing the difficulty when you start. I really think that if you're a fan of Persona or a tactical RPG enthusiast, I can recommend this game to you no problem. But if you're expecting quality at or near the level of the mainline entries or even some of the franchise's best spin-offs, you might end up disappointed. Let me explain. And don't get me wrong, I like Persona 5 Tactica, but this game becomes pretty underwhelming once you get past the First Kingdom. This is primarily because after you get past this First Kingdom, every mission starts to feel the same, and for whatever reason, objectives become less and less diverse as the game goes along. In the First Kingdom, they're constantly trying to introduce new objectives to help get you acclimated to the game, and I thought this was going to be a good taste of what was to come, because even the spin-off Persona titles are fairly high quality, so I got excited. There's a few missions during the First Kingdom that require you to escape while being ambushed, and these feel like real challenges. It's early on, you're low leveled, you might only have one or two party members. Some of the brute types that are chasing you do a lot of damage when they get near, and confronting them isn't smart because they immediately counter to close the distance. So I thought, there's probably going to be other scenarios like this down the line, and unfortunately, those missions quickly become a rarity and the game becomes fairly bare bones. Just a lot of defeat all enemies, or survive a certain number of rounds. And I thought all this would have been fine if Persona 5 Tactica featured strong enemy variety. Instead, there's a startling lack of it. There are no flying enemies, no real elite enemy types, no mid-bosses to speak of, and for myself, all of this was really weird because as you're pushing through the different kingdoms and you're entering all these different settings, you're expecting different enemy types, but all they do is reskin the enemies. They don't have different abilities, so by the end of the game, you're aware of their limitations and beating them is no longer a challenge. As I stated earlier, the game rewards you for speed, so that lack of variety does make some sense, but some variation at the least would have been appreciated. I will say the warning signs regarding the lack of enemy types appear during your time in the First Kingdom. I don't think I noticed at first because I was pretty engrossed in that area, but you're constantly fighting the same 4 enemies. The First Kingdom will run you around 4 hours, and that's mostly due to cutscenes and the mountain of dialogue that accompanies them. There's no shade there, by the way. The writing in this game is solid and the voice acting is good, but the amount of cutscenes can kill the pace a bit. And I believe this was a weird decision too, because when you're given the option to progress a story, and you would think that it would just put you into more combat scenarios, but really it's just more dialogue and then you're back to another menu. I have no idea why they did this, by the way. It was just a really odd choice to me. So with those 4 enemy types in mind, when you hit the Second Kingdom, they'll introduce 3 more enemy types, and I think that's about it for the game. I really thought this was going to be the type of tactical RPG that constantly adjusts enemies and adds new movesets as you progress through the story, but that's not the case here. Once you get through the Second Kingdom, you have now seen all of the enemy types. Like I said, I was hoping for a mid-boss or 2 in each of these areas, but they don't exist. So even though you've played all the different Persona series and you saw all the different mid-bosses and the palaces and whatever other areas they were in, don't expect them here. They're just not. and I think they were really needed because they would have added some spice into these levels. And speaking of the levels, the last flaw I'm going to highlight, and it's probably the one that I feel is not as bad as the first two, is that level design in Persona 5 Tactica is all over the place. Some areas can feel really unique, but for the most part, they all kind of blend in with one another, especially as you get toward the end of the game. Like, it's weird, because some of these areas will feature what I like to call exotic design choices, because they place an enemy on a platform that looks like you're going to have to strategize to get to, because in other tactical RPGs, you might not be able to reach them, as there are a number of factors you have to take in consideration. You know, height, obstacle, distance, those types of things. But here's the thing though, you don't have to worry about any of that because of your Persona abilities. Meaning, neither height or physical obstacles are going to deter you from reaching an enemy with an attack. As long as your ability can reach a certain area, your attack is guaranteed to hit. As I said earlier, most abilities are going to force enemies out of cover, so follow-up actions are easy to execute regardless of where your character is. So you're going to have these strangely elaborate designs in some of these levels, which, by the way, they're still rare. They're going to mean nothing though, because you can reach these enemies without ever having to go the long way. It's really crazy how that works. It really feels like the developers were saving their best work for the bosses. I'm joking. There's only one boss in this game that I would say has anything close to an elaborate level design. I'm not going to show footage of this boss. I'm only going to show the first kingdom in this video, but I'm going to say that the second boss fight is one of the real highlights of the game, because you're more so battling the level than you are the boss itself, which, in my opinion, is pretty damn cool. Every other boss level, though, is relatively simple in design. You got some cover strewn about, and that's about it. It's pretty much one big square and nothing more. Like I said, level design in this game is just all over the place. Listen, I realize that practically all I've done so far is point out the flaws in this game, but the thing is, they're really noticeable in a narrative-heavy title. Look, you can mask level design issues in tactical RPGs with better enemy variety and constantly shifting objectives, and this goes both ways, as you can mask poor enemy variety with better level design. And this game could have really benefited from both. And here's the thing, unlike the mainline entries or Persona 5 Strikers, there's no exploration to speak of. There is nothing to break up the monotony. It is all menus in Persona 5 Tactica, and when you're playing a 15 to 20 hour story, you're going to notice the flaws because they're going to become really glaring when missions begin to string together and all you're doing is defeating enemies as your primary objective. And because leveling is shared and no one gets left behind, you don't ever have to worry about strengths or weaknesses or team composition because everyone's on a level playing field. You can leave Joker behind and never worry, because as long as you keep up with your weapons or your personas, you can play as you want. Which, by the way, is great, because if you have a favorite Phantom Thief, now is the time to have them take charge. Persona 5 Tactica is a safe, and I mean super safe tactical RPG, and that's not a bad thing. But coming from the Persona series, I wanted just a bit more depth. The only time it really deviates is in the first kingdom, and it throws you for a loop immediately. And without spoiling anything, I was surprised about how the opening moments unfolded. I was really interested in seeing how it all played out. This game features a pretty strong narrative, and I feel like fans of Persona 5 might have mixed feelings on it because it really doesn't have anything to do with the Phantom Thieves. Like, they're definitely a part of the story, but the new characters are obviously the focal point. It really feels like a side quest that quickly evolved into a main story, and the Phantom Thieves just happened to be there for the ride. You've seen these plot points, by the way. There's nothing here the fans of the series are going to be surprised about, but I still found it to be a really strong narrative. New characters in Toshiro and Irina are fantastic additions to the Persona universe, with Toshiro being a pretty compelling character at times. It's really fun watching him interact with the Phantom Thieves, and it's also really funny playing as Joker and being a massive smartass, because the entire cast always comes off as surprised whenever a witty remark gets made. It's a real highlight of the game. You know, at first I thought it was a mistake to allow every character to have a secondary persona, but I appreciate it as the game went along because it did allow you to play favorites. But here's the thing. By opening up all of your characters to second personas, you should be able to create some pretty unique lineups, which in turn should have created some unique encounters. For whatever reason, the Baton Pass in Tactica is only something you can utilize if a team member gets KO'd, and this to me feels like a wasted opportunity. I do like the fact that depending on the difficulty, you have a limited number of passes, but imagine being able to use the Baton Pass as an opportunity to switch up your team mid-fight if you feel like something isn't working or you need that extra oomph. Also, I do wish there was more diversity with the individual skill trees because everyone has different multi-target attacks, they all have a buff or a debuff ability, and there's generally something unique to that character, but for the most part, they're all pretty similar. I wanted more individuality because it would have forced players to care about composition, and that would have added another layer of strategy into this game. For the most part, strategy is reserved for the different side quests. These are easily the best parts of the game, and in my opinion, there's just not enough of them. In these quests, you're tasked to complete different scenarios with specific characters, and the objectives are generally going to boil down to clear all enemies or make it to a certain point, but you have to do so in 1 or 2 moves, and this makes every quest its own puzzle. These are all fun and engaging, and I implore you to play them because they're easily the most fun in the game, and some of the rewards you get are well worth it. They unlock as you progress through the story, and I just wanted more of them because of how unique they were. These quests are what I considered rare moments of challenge in a tactical RPG that at times was devoid of it. In the end, Persona 5 Tactica left me wondering what this title could have been if the developers decided to throw caution to the wind. Spin-offs usually vary in quality, and to their credit, most of the Persona spin-offs have been really good. Each of them usually have features that make them stand out in their respective genre, and here, they do something that's really unique to the series. They unshackle everyone. It should have been a home run. But that's only if enough was done to differentiate the different character skill trees. Instead, they all practically function the same. The entire game, especially as you're barreling down Kingdom 2, really starts to come off as very surface level. Nothing really feels that deep. And that's a shame because what's here is executed well enough because every mechanic in this game works as intended, but I really felt underwhelmed because there were opportunities to really stand out and scale as it pertains to objectives and skills, but the developers decided to play it safe instead. You're getting a solid game. I can recommend Persona 5 Tactica to anyone, but I really feel like this game could have been so much more. And that's going to do it for this video. So if you like the content, please consider sharing, and subscribing. I'm Ken from Pixelated Thoughts, and I'll talk to you next time.